Sage Wanderer here, and welcome to the sheep pen, bah, where no goats are allowed. So, before we get started on today's message, I would like to thank all of you who have supported me and continue to support me. You've been a great blessing to me. You've kept me alive over the last year and a half or so. And I want to thank especially those of you that helped me while I was making my cross-country trek to Oregon to deal with my mom's health crisis. And when I got back and finally made it around to the P.O. box, somebody had given me a brand new Hewlett-Packard computer that was anonymously drop shipped straight from a major big box store to my P.O. box, and sealed with the original tape. And it's a much better computer than I would have bought for myself. And I'm learning how to use it. It's my first touchscreen computer. So thank you so much to whoever sent that to me. I know that God's going to bless you greatly for supporting me in this effort, this channel. And yeah, it's just what a blessing to have such faithful supporters who take care of me. And God uses you to take care of me. And I thank you for hearing his voice. And I pray that God blesses you exponentially for your support of this message in this channel. Today I want to talk about weathering the storm. Now, storms are something that in modern times, unless they're really big, unless they're a tornado or a hurricane, we just kind of don't pay much attention to them, you know. Just come in for the evening and hope the electric don't go out, right? But occasionally we get storms in this country and around the world that are life-threatening. And, you know, right now there are people dealing with power outages from a storm on the East Coast. And in the Bible, and oftentimes through whatever philosopher or songwriter in some cases, you know, they use the storm as a metaphor for the hardships and struggles in life. You know, I grew up with my mom and dad as a singing group. We were a family singing group. I tell people I was kind of raised like the Partridge Family. I even kind of looked like the little redheaded bass player, Danny, growing up. And but my mom and dad used to sing this song. I'll sing you a little piece of it. He calms the troubled waters of your soul, takes your broken heart and makes it whole. When the storm clouds of life around you roll, well, he calms the troubled waters, the dark troubled waters of your soul. I'll never forget growing up listening to my parents sing that song in perfect harmony. Now, you know, storms can be literal. And I've talked about on this channel how Jesus controlled the storm, and how told the story of how I was part of a group of preachers who prayed away a tornado. And you can physically alter the weather through your prayers and your spiritual power. But I want to talk more about the storm as a metaphor. You know, when life becomes tumultuous, when struggles and trials and tribulations strike us, it's easy to equate that as a storm of life. And God doesn't always calm the storm. Sometimes he navigates you around the storm. Sometimes he empowers you to weather the storm. And I can't talk about the storm and not bring up the fact that Donald Trump, while still president, looked around at the chiefs of staff and other people that were on a platform with him, and he said, "This is the calm before the storm." And a character who I don't even want to hardly utter the alphabetical letter, but you know who I'm talking about. Let's see, QRSTUV. You know what I'm talking about? He glommed onto this anonymous poster on 4chan, glommed onto this statement and built this big illusion around how that was code for something. And a lot of people on January 6th that went there were under a grand deception. They thought that the United States Marines were just going to pop out, declare martial law, reinstate Trump as president, and they were just going to be there as moral support and cheerleaders. And they got drawn into a psyop and tricked into committing a crime that landed many of them in prison. And so, but what was Donald Trump really saying? I think anytime you stir up something, anytime you're opposing the enemy, anytime you're trying to tell the truth in the midst of lies, that you can guess there's going to be a backlash. And he was talking about that backlash, that storm that he knew was going to eventually come. But life deals us storms sometimes, and sometimes they're of our own making because we're standing up against the enemy and they're a backlash. I recently weathered a storm with my mom's health crisis. I had illness on my own that I was fighting. And a lot of that was backlash because I talked about God's ring of fire and hedge of thorns of protection. And I talked about a thing called the shield of faith or the force field of faith. And that caused a storm in my life because it made the enemy angry, made the devil angry, and he stirred up a storm against me. Sometimes the storms we face in life are because of other people's actions, and we find ourselves in the middle of something we didn't start, we didn't cause, and we're just a victim of. During these times when you're facing these trials and tribulations, it's easy for you to lose faith. The oldest ancient story in the Bible is Job. A lot of people think Genesis is first. Job is a much older story. But, Job faced the storm of all storms, the mother of all storms in his life. He lost everything. And yet he clung to his faith and his allegiance to God. And God eventually restored everything he lost. Sometimes God calms the storms in our lives. Sometimes God parts the storms, like the story I told where I had to drive through essentially a tumultuous thunderstorm with tornadoes in it to get home, and I prayed, and God opened this pathway of where I could see the stars. It was just over the road, and on both sides of the road this storm raged, and I went through in an area, in a narrow strip, the width of the road, where there was no rain, there was no hail, and there was no wind. But just right there on each side of the road, the wind was twisting the trees. So sometimes God will part the storm for you, and sometimes he helps you navigate around the storm. And one thing about weathering a storm or surviving a storm is that you have to be sensitive to the leading of the Holy Spirit. Is God calling me to just weather the storm, to batten down the hatches and ride it out? Is he calling me to sail into the storm and ride the wave? Is he going to calm the storm and create that bubble of protection around me? Is he going to dissipate the storm and make it go away and spare me completely? And knowing how to sense the Holy Spirit's guidance in the time of storm is extremely important, because God could be moving you one direction and you could be moving and you can move yourself in another if you're not plugged in. So when you sense the storm clouds rising in life, when you see the tribulation and trials coming at you, or even when you don't see them, your response to that is everything. And it goes back once again to this basic scripture that says, I try to get it right here. He calls upon us to draw close to God, resist the devil, and he'll flee. And the first step in that is drawing close to God. So many times we go into a negative thought process when storm clouds arise, when unexpected things happen, when the devil comes at us. We tend to panic. We tend to even say to God, "Why have you done this to me, God?" Well, it's not him. There's a real life devil in this world. And when you press into God, that's your first level of protection. Don't run from God. Don't blame God. Embrace God. Throw yourself at his mercy and ask God to protect you. And he has a number of ways of doing this. He has a number of ways of protecting us from the storms of life. Sometimes he just protects you, and the storm rages around you, just like he parted the storm for me. Other times he requires you to go to war against the storm and pray against the storm and cause the storm to be turned or to be dissipated. And sometimes he requires you to march straight into the storm and just weather it. And he strengthens you to weather the storm and go through it. It's an old saying. Sometimes you can't go around something, you can't go over it, you can't go under it. You just have to go through it. And it reminds me of the movie Forrest Gump, where you have the agnostic atheist or the God hater in Captain Dan, who's angry at God that he wasn't killed on the battlefield and instead was lost both of his legs. And he's on the Bubba Gump Shrimp Company boat, and there's a hurricane coming in. And they decide not to moor the boat, not to tie the boat down, but to go out past the storm and escape the storm and let it rage, knowing the ship can handle the waves. And Captain Dan climbs up into the crow's nest, and he straps himself to the top of the mast of the crow's nest, and he rages against God, right? But he weathers the storm. I'm about to cry because that's a powerful allegory, really, for sometimes what we got to do. We have to weather the storm. We have to see God deliver us from the storm. We have to let our anger and rage go. We have to be purified. We have to be tried by fire, as it were. And when Captain Dan in the story comes out the other side, he has a peace. He finds the peace of God in the storm. Sometimes that's the purpose of the storm, for you to find the peace of God, for you to go through it, for you to weather the storm. And it isn't always fun weathering a storm. It can be terrifying. But you just strap yourself in and you ride out the storm. And I promise you, when you get to the other side and you see how God protected you in the raging wind, how the waves did not overtake you, how he could have let you be destroyed, and instead he spared your life. And in that you can find peace, the peace of God that will live with you for the rest of your life. Storms are a part of our existence in the real world, and spiritual storms are a part of your spiritual growth. God may choose to protect you with his ring of fire and hedge of thorns. He may set a table for you in the presence of your enemy. But then other times you got to strap yourself to the crow's nest and cry out to God. And in it, you'll find your peace in the storm. Brothers and sisters, we are in a storm in our world. I could list off all the things that are going wrong in this country and in the world in general. I could spend a lot of time talking about how the devil has infiltrated our governments, our businesses, even our churches, and how it's all being turned against the believer. But let me tell you, there is peace at the end of the storm. Every storm ends, and every storm gives way to eventually peace. We may have to weather the storm. God may choose to protect you from the storm. But trust me, however God guides you through the storm, whatever happens in the storm of life, you can rest assured you're going to be better off on the other side. Even if it's a storm like Job went through, where it looks like you've lost everything. You've lost even your reason to live. But if you cling to God, if you cling to his promises, if you know that he's got you no matter what the storm brings, then all will be restored and you will be renewed. Few people recognize the end of the Job story, where Job's life is as good or better than it was before all of that God restores everything to him. Even in the eye of the storm, even in the center of the storm, it's so important that you keep your eyes on God, that you never turn your back on the Lord, that you have faith even in the storm. You could waste a lot of time wishing God had led you around the storm, and sometimes he does that. You know, it goes back to this story, Ted Cruz, one of the senators from Texas, got a lot of heat during the polar vortex a few years ago that took out all the power in Texas, and everybody's pipes froze and some people died, and it was an awful, awful storm. And he saw it coming, and he pulled his whole family out, and he had grandchildren in the house that he was worried about, and he took everybody to Mexico, and they just had a vacation. He's been criticized a lot for that, jumping ship, running from the storm. Sometimes that's how God works. He gives you the power and ability. Hey, I probably could have skipped that storm, but I went through that same storm. I went without water for a week, and God still protected me. I never lost power. My pipes just all froze up. My pump house froze up. But it actually strengthened me. I realized I had the survival skills to survive whatever nature threw at me. I realized that I had the propane on hand and the wood on hand to get through it if the storm had taken out the power. And I realized that snow melted over a wood stove makes a pretty good source of water, right? And so sometimes you're forced to ride out the storm. Sometimes God just whisks you off to Mexico and the storm rages where you used to be. Sometimes God surrounds you in his protection and the storm rages and you don't even feel it. But all of us in this life are required to go through some storm at some point. And I guess my message today is to seek God for his guidance. Lord, am I supposed to run from this? Lord, am I supposed to strap myself to the crow's nest and ride it out? Am I supposed to sit here while you cover me in your protection and the storm rages outside and it doesn't touch me? Am I to lose everything just to have it restored? You know, everything happens for a reason when you follow God's plan and purpose for your life. And when we get in trouble, when we face storms in life, is when we turn our back on God, when we blame God for the storm, when we rail against God for not protecting us from the storm, instead of embracing the situation and pressing into God. Remember, press into the Lord and the devil will flee from you. Resist the devil and he'll flee. And sometimes the drill, the practice, the lesson that we learn is to embrace the storm and ride it out and trust God through the storm. It can be very hard. It can be very hard to endure a trial and tribulation in life and still stay connected to God. But trust me when I tell you this, that God will never let you down. And even when things look really bad, if you press into God, the end result will be peace. The end result will be restoration. The end result will be valuable lessons you learned while fording or surviving or evading or going through a storm. I'd like to say that there are no more storms facing me in life, but that's just not a practical statement. Sooner or later, I will face another storm. You saw me face some storms in my life since I've had this channel. But one thing that I always do is I know that I seek God first. That I don't ignore the storm, but at the same time, I don't let the storm rob me of my connection with God. In fact, many times storms come our way in life to drive us closer to God, to teach us the value of that connection. So how can you deal with the storm when it comes? The first thing you got to do is pray. Pray for guidance. Do I run from the storm? Do I rage against the storm? Do I ride it out? Are you going to part the storm for me, Lord? And you have to lay yourself at his mercy and realize that something like a storm, whether it's a literal one or whether it's a figurative storm of tribulation and trials and troubles in this life, that you have to realize that either way, God is going to be there for you and with you in the storm. And if you never turn your back on God and you embrace him in the face of all adversity, even if you have to lay down your life for God, then on the other side is God's peace and restoration. It's a promise. Sometimes we're called to condemn the storm. Sometimes we're called to pray the storm away, like Jesus did when the storm hit his ship. He had to wake up in the middle of the night and pray. And he was quite angry at his disciples for not realizing that was the proper pathway, that they should just pray the storm away. You can pray the storm away. But if you pray and the storm doesn't go away, know this, God's got a different plan. Because when you come out the other side of a life storm, you're always stronger than when you went in. And Nietzsche, which is a secularist philosopher, psychologist, said, what doesn't kill us only makes us stronger. And there is reason to see that as wisdom, that oftentimes these trials and tribulations teach you things. They show you things about yourself. They reveal your inner strength. They can strengthen your relationship with God. You'll come out the other side with a stronger faith. You'll come out the other side with a more steadfast belief in the power of God when he sees you through the storm. Whether he parts it, whether he protects you from it, or whether he sends you into the heart of it to overcome it and come out the other side. Storms in life should not be feared. They should be seen as an opportunity to grow, an opportunity to become stronger, an opportunity to be a person of faith and to have a testimony on the other side. How many of you have gone through a storm in life and leaned on God and had him see you through it, so that now you have this powerful testimony that you can share with others who are going through a similar situation? How many of you have been through storms only to find they made you stronger, only to find that you were restored on the other side to a higher level of grace and a higher level of success in life? I guess Bully over there wants to be on TV. He is a TV-worthy dog. He's handsome. Are you going through a storm in your personal life right now? Press into God. We're going through a storm as a nation right now, and we need to press into God. We need to know that God's going to see us through, whether it's us being strapped to the mast and weathering the storm, or whether God's going to whisk us off to a peaceful paradise while the storm rages where we used to be. This is a time when you go through a storm, it's time to lean on God completely. Lean not upon your own understanding, but lean on the power of God. Listen for his voice. Seek his counsel. Because he might navigate you around the storm. You know, just recently here, just this last week, a big hurricane assaulted the East Coast. And I saw several clips about skippers of boats, of ships, having to make the decision whether they were going to tie their boats down and hope for the best, or whether they were going to sail away to try to sail around the storm, or they were going to do like Forrest Gump and go out and ride the storm out on the ocean where there's nothing to smash your boat against. This was a moment of decision for so many skippers out there to decide how they were going to handle the coming storm. There's a storm coming in our country. How are you going to handle it? Whatever decision you make out of your own intellect will more than likely be wrong. You'll second guess it. You'll look back on it and go, But when you lean on God, when you trust him no matter what, when the storm rages and it starts to shake your confidence and you go, no, this storm was meant for me and I'm right where I'm supposed to be because I listened to the voice of God, because I sought his counsel and he is guiding me. Keeping your faith during trials and tribulations is one of the most difficult things to do. And the storm our country's facing is mind-boggling. It's a hurricane of the highest class. It's a hurricane of the most destructive nature. And it's just getting started. We haven't reached even yet the eye of the hurricane for what our nation and our world is facing. But when you press into God, it don't matter what the enemy throws at you. It doesn't matter how high the waves are. It doesn't matter how hard the storm rages. It doesn't matter how the winds tear things apart, because you know that whether you're going around it, under it, through it, whether he's parting the storm for you, whether he's calming the storm for you, or whether you just have to ride it out, that on the other side, God's will be done on the other side. If you don't lose your faith, if you don't blame God, if you press into God, regardless, you will come out better on the other side. I'm challenging you as you face your storms in life to not let them divide you from God, to not let them cleave you away from him, but for you to press in and find shelter under his wing, to find shelter in the time of storm, to find his grace and love as a refuge for you, regardless of what this storm brings into your life. Some of you may be facing end-of-life struggles. Some of you may be facing illnesses. Some of you may be facing financial ruin or struggles in that regard. And just know that if your faith never wavers, if you press into God, if you find shelter in him, if you stand on the rock of your salvation and let your faith be a shield, that regardless of what happens on the other side of the storm, you'll find peace. you'll find the peace of God. It takes a real Christian soldier to find the peace of God in the storm. But rest assured, regardless, on the other side, you will find that peace. The winds will calm. This too shall pass. Sometimes God guides us around the storm. That's the best thing to happen, is to not be there when the storm strikes, to pull a Ted Cruz and be in paradise somewhere. If you have the ability to do that, then I suggest that's the funnest way to avoid a storm. But when the storm rages in your life, don't forsake your faith. See your faith as the vessel that will see you through, the lifeboat of life that will bring you through to the peace on the other side of the storm. I've encountered a lot of storms in life. I've encountered some right in front of you on this channel. And God has used many of you as a lifeboat to support this channel and to keep me financially above the waves, keep my head above water, figuratively and I suppose literally to some degree, to protect me from the snares of the enemy financially. And I'm very grateful for how you've let the Lord use you to support this ministry, so this message of faith and spiritual power and love and forgiveness can go out to the world. Because so many times in churches, they're preaching about other things. They're not talking about what I consider to be the core values of Christianity. It really isn't about hell, sin, death, and the grave. It's about spiritual power and overcoming the devil in this life. It's about becoming stronger spiritually. And that's what we preach about on this channel, is spiritual strength. And faith is the most powerful thing to protect you in times of the storm. When the storm rages, your faith is a shield. It's a lifeboat. It's a windbreak. It's a rock that you can hide behind in the storm. So thank you for your support. I do need your continued support. If God is calling you to make a gift to this channel, like the person who gave me a laptop, because what many of you don't know is that I'd received some money that I thought was for the laptop, and then my mom's health crisis happened and I had to spend that to go to Oregon. And I was thinking I wasn't going to get my computer, just to come home and find that one of you had blessed me with a computer and had it drop shipped right to my P.O. box. And I want to thank you deeply, all of you who support the channel. And I pray that you will listen to the voice of God concerning supporting this channel. There's a link in the description, or the more button, whatever you're on a phone or a computer. And that'll drop down a menu that gives you access to my PayPal and my Cash App and my P.O. box. So you can be an instrument of God in protecting me and providing for me. I don't ask for much. This is not a big plexiglass pulpit, crystal cathedral ministry. I'm just a guy who lives in a cabin in the woods, a voice crying in the wilderness. And I don't need much because I don't ask for much because I don't need much, because I live very small in my little cabin in the woods. And just help me keep the lights on and food in the shelves and gas in my car so I can go to town from time to time. So if God's calling you to help me, please heed the call and make a donation to this channel so we can keep these videos coming. Because everybody knows if I got to go to work full time, I can't do both. I just don't have the energy to do all the work it takes to preach and keep this channel running and work full time. Maybe when I was younger, but age is catching up to me. All right, I'm going to leave you with this powerful prayer. May God surround you in his ring of fire and hedge of thorns of protection. May he send mighty angels of sufficient rank, authority, and number to drive the enemy from your midst and to create for you a oasis in the storm, a paradise in the storm. May he send you around it. May he send you under it. May he send you over it, or maybe you just have to go through it. But either way, may you be protected by holy angels. May the peace of God find you in the storm. And when you emerge on the other side of life's storms and struggles and battles, may you be stronger. May you be more faith-filled. May you be a beacon, a lighthouse in the dark to those who are going through storms of their own. And may you find the peace of God. May the peace of God envelop you. In Jesus' name, amen. We'll see you next time on The Sheep Pen.